Hey, this is Lindsay, and today we're talking about the 2019 Husqvarna FE501. I recently got this bike from Husqvarna to ride for about the course of a week, some very general fire roads, single track, a mix of canyon riding, a little bit of highway, some open desert, and it's actually not the first time I've ridden this specific bike. I also borrowed one for a music video that I was in earlier this year. If anybody knows what Nervo is, Google that. I actually got to ride that for a bunch of little stunts in a video and got to learn quite a bit about what the bike is like to ride aggressively and goof off quite a bit with. Between the time of treating it like a normal dual sport bike and to goof off on it quite a bit, there's definitely a lot to like about this bike out of the box, and there's two main things to focus on: the weight or the lack thereof, and then the overall spread of power stock. And that's really what stands out to this. This is why people really like this bike stock, is because of it being so close to the off-road or motocross models for them. They really don't pack on a lot of extras. It's just the basic of the bigger tank, the headlamp, the tail light, little turn signals, but nothing is really overbuilt on the bike, which keeps that weight down. And then the power, realistically, it feels like it makes about as much power as some of the lower end motocross 450s in the class. And a very smooth power. The Husqvarna is already like that in motocross trim, of course, but they definitely tone it down even more in this bike. Even in their motocross models, they're extremely quiet. They've been able to keep that down just a little bit more in this model with a little bit different baffle in the exhaust, but without having to build basically a bazooka out back. So how about the actual riding experience? The lack of weight stands out in a few situations. It's not hugely important in a lot of your standard dual sport riding situations, whether you're on the highway, on your just dirt roads, your canyons. You don't really get in a situation where that's worthwhile, but where you get into is the tight single track, when you're constantly having to put your foot down and pick the bike up around a tight corner. Anytime you need to lift it, anytime you need to put out physical exertion into the bike for a few moments at a time, you start to get used to that lightweight and really enjoy it. I especially notice it the most when ascending or descending very steep climbs. It's a lot easier to control the bike. It's very easy to keep it underneath you, to grip with the legs, and it definitely drops down the exertion on the body, and it makes the bike really fun to do some very long and technical style riding on. The slight negative for me with the lack of weight or some of the lack of other dual sport items we see on the bike, some of the buffers, some of the things that keep it maybe a little more comfortable, is on the highway. This was definitely a little bit harder for me to ride. Yes, it has all the power to get up on the highway and be able to freely move in and out of traffic and not really ever feel like you're wanting a ton extra, but the bike also vibrates quite a bit more than a lot of other dual sport machines I've ridden. It wasn't the most comfortable to be on the highway for more than about 15-20 minutes at a time between the tingling in my feet, just little things like that. It's not the style of bike I would want to take on those big long journeys in stock trim. But like I said, I think they've really catered this to more the extreme side of dual sport riding, not for that general touring guy that just wants to get off-road a little bit. They've really catered to this, to the guy that wants to do some deep adventures in the mountains, that really kind of is that guy that rides along the highway and looks up and goes, I want to go there and I don't want to worry about what I'm going to run into. Now, the suspension's interesting to me. The Husqvarna's biggest difference to the KTM is the lack of a PDS system, actually having a full link, which I enjoy the characteristic of a linkage on the bike. Yes, there's a little bit less ground clearance if you're going to get a little bit sandy in the rocks and if you're going to run it into things. But overall, I like the characteristic of the shock. It did, to me, throw off the balance a bit of the bike, though. The fork is WP's what I would consider a very basic fork, the Explorer. It's great for basic off-road riding, but is aggressive as the rest of the bike is in power characteristic and weight. The fork, to me, doesn't match that. It's very soft. It has some preload options to play with. The clickers, to me, don't make a massive difference on this fork, and that's where I really start to struggle with this bike in a lot of those aggressive riding, especially in more of like a desert whooped out condition. The fork is so soft, it's a little bit harder for me to ride this bike aggressive. And the biggest thing I notice is, while the weight of the bike and the way the power is makes it extremely easy to use the bike all over and doesn't really wear me down, it's the softness in the fork and the lack of holdup that wears me out, because I just feel like I'm trying to hang onto the bike more as it dives in certain sections. The bright side, though, is, of course, Husqvarna has great power stock. It's very light already, so if you're gonna spend your money, if you're gonna get the bike and you know you wanna invest into it, the first place for me personally is in the forks. Because of what the bike is already kind of catered to, I would really lean towards that upgrade. I think another thing the bike's really good for, because of the way it's trimmed stock, this is actually to me a pretty interesting bike to gear towards some more aggressive off-road, to even gear for the guy that kind of wants to ride it straight out of their house into some great trail riding, into something aggressive and adventurous, or even the guy that honestly wants to take it to the track. Outside of the fork, it's the dual sport bike I've ridden that would be probably the most capable on a motocross track in stock trim. So I think it's really for the guy that knows exactly where he's going to get off and ride this bike, but it's not for the kind of guy that wants to put the long hauls on the highway.